today we are going to talk about something that I think no matter what you do in your career and or your personal life, at some point you're going to be using AI to help you create content. And so we want to dive into AI content creation specifically in marketing and procurement. So I'm in marketing. I come from a go-to-market sales marketing perspective. I have lots of thoughts about this, lots of examples and things I'd like to share. Dr. Elouise, I know you are a heavy AI user
Well,
and have lots of
also, I am a heavy AI content consumer.
yes. I
Which
think
will,
that's a fair. So we've got some different perspectives on me actually as the user of AI creating the content to be consumed, and then you have also the perspective of being a heavy consumer of the content that is generated. So love that we've got that both of those angles there. And then if we have time, I also have some thoughts and things I want to share. And Dr. Elouise, get your perspective on how procurement folks can and should be using AI to produce content as it relates to kind of day to day in your job.
or how they shouldn't be doing that. It might be the better way to frame that.
So you're funny that you say that. In my notes that I have prepared, I have the good and the bad.
And I can bring the ugly, and I've been making some jokes in my presentations lately, but we'll get there.
I don't have an ugly section. I just have good and bad in my notes. So I wanted to start off by kind of setting the context of the discussion about some research that has just come out in the last couple weeks. And it's around research that was done from OpenAI and both Claude as well around how people are actually using their tools. What does the research say? So I thought that would be an interesting kind of perspective to start us off. So OpenAI did a joint study with Harvard and an organization called NBER, and they analyzed about 1.5 million ChatGPT conversations. Anthropic, who is the owner of Claude, did a report which they're calling the Anthropic's Economic Index that provides additional context by tracking broader usage and automation trends across both ChatGPT and Claude. So some of the patterns, I would say, in what these reports have shared. Now, keep in mind, all data is biased. And we don't know how involved either of these organizations were in kind of curating, right, how they wanted the research to look. But I still think it's worth kind of sharing what the reports are saying that they found. So personal use, and I was really surprised by this, how much of the users on ChatGPT are using it for personal use versus professional. I thought it would have been a closer mix at least, but there was definitely a much larger trend in people using ChatGPT for personal versus business, where Claude was much more the opposite, where they saw a lot more business kind of coding, more techie people using it versus being used for personal use. So ChatGPT is widely used for brainstorming, learning, curiosity-driven explanation, and quick answers. So that would be things to me like you need a recipe, you need to know an explanation around something, or some sort of hobby-related task like I need to find a local gym. What are the gyms in my area? Something like that. Claude tends to be used for longer exploratory conversations and more detailed context retention. So that's for the personal use of it. Work use, ChatGPT is often used for productivity. So, drafting emails, summarizing long documents, preparing presentations, or writing first drafts of content. Claude is frequently leveraged for research heavy tasks, complex problem solving, or cases where users want it to think out loud in longer reasoning chains. Cross platform behavior. Many users don't stick with just one platform. They bounce between ChatGPT and Claude depending on the task. So, again, quick, sharp tasks, ChatGPT right now seems to be the preference. And then for more heavy thinking, more research, extended outputs, Claude seems to be the preference. Enterprise versus consumer differences. In the enterprise setting, usage tends to center on productivity and efficiency, while in consumer context, it's more exploratory and curiosity driven. So I'll pause there, Dr. Elouise, and see what your thoughts are on kind of the summary of that research.
So that kind of tracks. There's a couple of responses I would give. One is it makes sense that ChatGPT or OpenAI is the one that people use for hobbies and exploratory and endeavors and whatnot, because it was the one that captured everybody's attention. It's the one that everybody latched onto in the consumer world, and something like Claude or even Gemini is not going to overnight overtake it, because it's like Xerox. Xerox has become, there's a name for this and I can't remember what it is, but Xerox is the name for copy machines, or or Kleenex is for tissue.
You know what I think about that is Band-Aid.
Band-Aid, yeah,
Like,
exactly. Yeah.
They've
Same thing.
become so popular, their brand name is what people think is the name of the product.
Exactly. Like Coke is instead of soda. So, and so it very much is this idea of, or it is this phenomenon where, like, most people's foray into quote unquote AI was ChatGPT, and perhaps still remains so. So that makes sense. And Claude is particularly good at coding and solving technical problems. So and if it's good at that, it's never going to make the leap to displace OpenAI. And so that makes sense to me. And then the cross-platform. And I mean, first of all, in my classes, I encourage people to try them out. Or if you have a query for one, query all three, because or Grok or DeepSeek. But just so you get a feel for how these AIs interpret your question, and also gives you a good way to shortcut testing the validity of your response or the response you get. So it makes total sense.
And I would add to that, I think it's also really important to test what's going to give you the right tone and personality in the content that it produces.
Yeah, and it's great that we have so many options, and it's probably because we have so many good options that it builds, because you might use any number of these for different things, and that actually might draw more people to spend more time on these tools.
Mhm. So, you had shared some videos with me. So that was kind of our setting the stage. Now let's talk about AI content creation for marketing in particular.
Okay. So I'm super excited about this, because this gets back to the metric ton of TikTok and YouTube that I watched over the summer. And by the way, sorry, did I cut you off?
No, I was
I'm
just
just so
gonna say,
excited.
You shared, I think it was 5 videos, if I'm correct, and so I wanna and that was kind of the premise for our conversation today, so I want to make sure that we have some time to talk about the videos and kind of how that spurred our idea for this podcast.
Okay, so and so I had like my video person pull together some of these clips, and over the summer as I was flipping through endless amounts of TikTok, I noticed something. There was I at first thing that jumped out at me was that there was this content creator that was essentially 2 to 3 dogs in a podcast studio making jokes, sort of like the podcasters in the manosphere, as they call it, or Joe Rogan and Theo Vaughn and some of the others, where they're just kind of shooting, sort of like just trying to think of how to say this politely, but they're just chit-chatting and joking and having fun. Well, this creator had created the same idea with dogs, and or they have a special.
It's hysterical.
It's absolutely hysterical. You got to watch these videos. And then so that was kind of like, oh, that's kind of funny. And then it kind of like clicked that, oh, that must be AI content. But then this is by far there's uh these office scenes where you have workers doing something, and then it's the presumably the app that they're in, like Copilot or Excel or Google Sheets, like is this personification of the little logo or the icon, and and the icon
Oh
is
yeah, it's like all the big tech like Slack and Salesforce walking around, and it's making fun of all their shortcomings and kind of how people speak about them in layman terms like on the street.
yeah. So a perfect example is this person sitting at the desk and asks Outlook, "Can you tell me uh, how many, or can you tell me what my emails are to Sarah?" And the little icon sitting there and says, "Nope, there is no Sarah. I know. Oh, wait, here's 600 emails from Sarah," which is just like so perfect. And
There's
you know,
also one about how Salesforce keeps losing customers to HubSpot.
I know. It's like, please don't go to HubSpot. Please don't. Or one that's Microsoft Word, and the user says, "Oh, I think I'll just move this image," and then the whole thing turns up, like the whole office turns upside
Yeah.
down, and and then of course there's some colorful language. So be warned, if you don't want the language, don't watch that one. But where the apps are berating the users as if the users are doing something wrong, when
Yeah.
in reality it's the shortcomings in the apps. Um, so it's like really funny, and then this gets back to the 80s and 90s nostalgia. There's a whole series of them of like takes you back to what it felt like and looked like in the 80s and 90s of and it's like kids on bicycles and sort of talking about their experience, and some of the things you and I talked about get brought to life. And as I was watching more and more of these, because of course, if you watch one or two or share, then all of a sudden you start getting a lot more.
3 hours later.
Oh my god! And by the way, even just today, I was took a little break. I was watching TikTok, and a number of these newer videos with that were I forget what the content was. Oh, there's one. Uh, was the baby in there? The
There was, I think, 1 or 2 with the which were hysterical with the babies talking like adults.
Yeah, so it's a brand new baby still in the hospital, and one's walking down the hall and they're interviewing the baby, and it's like, "I'm out of here. I'm going to grandma. She's got cookies."
I actually think the babies of all of them might have been my favorite.
Uh, the apps are my favorite, but just because of the way the apps treat the users. Anyway, so what it got me thinking is like, oh my God, all of these things are AI created. And all you have to do is imagine like and put in the, I mean, ultimately it's a prompt and or a series of prompts to get to generate this content. And I was just blown away. I still am blown away at the creativity. And it got me really thinking about, oh my God, I don't need to watch podcasts or at least a lot of this content because I mean, I do like watching the humans create content for different reasons, but I am equally entertained by these dogs in the podcast studio because I own, because I have dogs and like, it's like, and the dogs are judging the humans and because it's just so relatable and same with the apps. And so it's like, who cares about sitcoms anymore? Or goodness, I never want to see reality TV again. Just give me all this like well-produced AI generate content. It got me really thinking about the like where we are in this world. Now, of course, it's a like it's like this is part and parcel to creating marketing generated content.
So there's
Sorry.
there's a New York Times article that came out in the last couple weeks, and the two AI podcasts that I listen to religiously every week both talked about it. So I wanted to bring it up here because it ties into the video examples that you just shared. And the podcast studio, which might actually be, we should look to see who's the creator of the dog podcast. It might actually be the studio, but their name is, it's Inception Point AI. And their whole premise is they produce AI generated podcasts. Right now, they're doing about 3,000 podcast episodes per week. Get ready for this. This is not a misspeak, at $1 per show.
Wow.
And their data shows that if they get 5 listeners per episode, they're profitable based on um actually it might have been 20, might have been the number 20. If they get 20 people who listen to a podcast based on their revenue sponsorship model, they make money at producing at the cost of $1 per show. So
Wow.
this has caused quite a bit of stir on the internet. So if you haven't gone in, go into ChatGPT, do a Google search, go into Claude and type in, controversy around Inception Point AI. And you'll see very, very opinionated people talking about this. So I think there's, a couple things to think about. One, I think to your point and examples, there are incredibly creative things that you can do when you have this capability. And so I think for people who struggle with being able to produce really creative content or creative things consistently, this is a solution or something that will help kind of spark and enhance that.
But
Trade-off.
good. Yeah, keep going.
Trade-off is who is actually fact checking anything. So you get in there, you produce, if nobody's going in, and we don't know in what cases when somebody is and isn't, and they're just spewing out information, and an audience starts listening to it and thinks it's the truth or thinks it's gospel, you're going to quickly misspread information. For me, as a someone who prefers podcasts over reading books, for example, we're all super busy. And the last thing I have time to do is scan through thousands of more podcasts that are already on the market. So I think it's going to be hard for people to discern and get through the volume to actually find the quality content that's relevant.
Yeah, and I think that gets to, I was going to react because the downside of all of this, like from my perspective as a content consumer, is a lot of the stuff now on YouTube is AI. I don't know if it's AI generated. It's probably, actually, I can tell it's AI generated because there will be duplication in the themes. So it'll talk about, da 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 da, and then it'll repeat some of the information and also the pronunciations. Like partway through, you're like, oh, that didn't make any sense, and then you realize it's just the
Mhm.
same monotone voice. So it gets to be very boring. So, so especially for long form content, I really don't want an AI voice or AI generation. And I think that's where humans, where like can really, because I find myself craving human information. I do want to just flag one thing though, that the humans have a there's a lot of sort of controversy right now because humans are putting out a lot of the tragic shooting here of Charlie Kirk has created a just absolute, or it's highlighted the the just how fast social media can produce content and create narratives and challenge narratives. And I think that it's so while the AI can create these, uh, there's no fact checking. The humans are also, I think we're starting to hit that peak of reality of, humans aren't really fact checking, or they're not waiting for the facts to be revealed either.
Yeah, so it becomes, how do we know what is truthful?
Yeah. And yeah. And so then it gets back to just keep it focused on marketing. How do we create compelling content? A 10-second podcast of dogs interviewing each other is a lot different than a monotone, repetitious, mispronounced 60-minute thing explaining, Russia and Ukraine. So
Mhm. Um, Second example, or whatever we're calling this, kind of practical applications, is the whole idea that people are already saying that SEO is dead. So there's the two
by the way,
new,
SEO is search engine optimization for those
yeah.
that, and
So
that's where you work or pay Google to get your listing on the first page and ideally at the top.
and in marketing, if you're not on the first page, you don't exist.
Yes. And there's
It's
for the last decade, maybe 15, 20 years, there's been a whole cottage industry, or maybe even full blown industry of consultants and tools and best practices to get yourself on that home page or first
Yeah.
page of
And
results.
there are billions of dollars that spent a year on paying money to Google to buy real estate on that first page if you can't organically get there. And then you've got the whole marketing and consulting engine that has been built around SEO. So hiring experts and contractors to help organizations that don't have in house expertise. And now there's a whole movement of folks saying SEO is dead. And the new thing is either geo or AEO. And geo is generative engine optimization. AEO is answer engine optimization. And I want to speak to AO for a second. AEO. There right now, when you go in and are looking for something, we'll just use ChatGPT and Claude as our examples here, but any of the tools, the way that people are searching for things is question based. So you would, and that's what, at least right now that could change, but that's kind of the way that people are looking for things, is they're going directly into an AI tool and they're asking a question. AI then has their crawlers that are going out and scraping the internet, so scraping websites and web pages and trying to find the best answer for that question to return back to the user. So this is starting a big movement for organizations to restructure how they write content and making it into what I call a structured Q&A format. So my team and I are in the middle of launching 2 campaigns in October. And the way that we started the campaigns is different now because we're revising the content to make it in a Q&A format. So that when we publish the content, for example, in a series of blog articles or on LinkedIn, that we're making it in a way that's more likely to be picked up by an AI search. So that is, to me, a really big shift that's happened this year.
Okay, and so I don't know, I got the giggles today. It's all those videos that are just cracking me up in the back of my head. I was talking to a startup and they were asking me to evaluate their website, and from a human point of view, it looked dreadful. And of course, the response came back of, well, this is for AI, not for humans. And I kind of feel like we have to bridge that gap a little bit, because you can't just have, like, if I want to go, somebody says, oh, check out X company.
Yeah.
I don't, like, I want to go look and assess it. I don't want AI, and I don't need ChatGPT to do that.
So I think there's a balance of, if people don't know you exist, they're never even going to go to your website.
Right.
So you have to be found. So that's step one. People have to know you exist to even know to go to your website. So you have to write content that's going to come up in AI search. Then
Fair.
once somebody, and AI searches are not pulling up pages and pages like Google. You
No.
go in and type in a question, I maybe get 2, 3, 4 responses. So not only, and so that means the competition is even more fierce because there's a fewer number of companies or solutions or responses that are even coming up.
Yeah.
Then, to your point, once somebody knows you exist and wants to go look at your website, it should be human. So a human is interested enough to consume the content on your website and doesn't just go to it and then bounce. Right? So there's a balance there of figuring out how to appeal to both.
Yes.
So I just wanted to call that out as another super real example. My team and I are living it right now as we're in the midst of heavy content production, with that balance of telling a story and being interesting and being a thought leader, but also making sure our content gets found. Why produce blogs if no one ever reads them, no one finds them?
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
So I think there's a very hard thing to do. This is not easy.
Well, and on the SEO stuff, for many years, Google would tweak the algorithm, and then everybody's
Yep.
results would be skewed and changed. And I suspect that will be the case times 1,000 with all these different AI models, because you get like referenced in ChatGPT, and then you go to Claude and you're nowhere to be found. So
Yeah. So I listened to a podcast called My First Million, and it's entrepreneurs, CEOs, founders from all over the world come on and share their story. And in one of the episodes I recently listened to, talking about AEO, because I'm really curious about how the online search is changing so dramatically and what my team and I can do to really help our company come up in those searches. The example that they talked about was a company called NerdWallet, and NerdWallet does evaluations on credit cards. So they go out and study credit cards, and they'll post their research, talk about, 5 credit cards that are nightmares, don't touch them. Here are our 10 best recommendations why. So they started producing all this content, and they literally were not making any money. And then overnight, Google changed their criteria for search, and they had done the right things that Google had pivoted to, and they started making something like $30 million a year simply because the way that Google changed their search model.
It's amazing.
So that's an example that I just think about and I remember, because it can have that dramatic of an impact almost overnight.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the good, the bad, the ugly for AI as it relates to content creation for marketing. What do you want to start with? What are you feeling?
Uh, let's start with the good.
Okay. All right. Do you wanna go
No,
first?
no, you can go.
Okay. So for me, I'm gonna just talk about personally. It prevents the writer block because you're not staring at a white piece of paper. And I think that's probably the most impactful way that, as a marketer and as a content creator and as a leader of a marketing organization, that has impacted our team. Is you have an idea, you have a thought, it gives you an outline, it gives you a starting point, it gives you something which makes it not so scary and overwhelming. So to me, that's been a huge change and a really positive, I would say, impact on my career and my content creation. I would also say it allows me to have time to actually focus on the things that matter in polishing and making the content really good versus all the crappy stuff that you have to do to even build to get to that point. So research, outline, all this stuff that just takes so much time that isn't really putting your thought leadership, your perspective, your unique spin on it. And I don't like doing all that stuff. I want to do the last 20%, and AI has allowed me to free up so much of my time to be able to do that.
All right. I want to add two things that are sort of like kind of in combination. Where I find it very helpful is the tweaking to get to this right. I was looking for the right combination of words, and I had the rough, and I just described the rough area, and I gave me some things, and then bang, right. And that's happened in quite a number of times where it just allows me to get to that last, inspire the last couple of words or the two words to pair together. Um, and then I think the other thing with uh, that I really like is the back and forth, because the Google search, and I'm a big Google fan, but it's like, okay, I put in my query and now I got to go through 200 websites or whatever, go down the rabbit hole. But I like being able to talk back and forth, and it just says, well, like, because I was looking for these terms, and it says, well, you could do this or that, and I can ask questions, and it feels like a conversation. Maybe it's sort of thought partnership. So I like that a lot.
Mhm. I also think for folks that are like really into marketing, not just doing it as one of the thousand things they do in their job, but especially if you're, a full-time marketer, is the ability to do A/B testing at
Mhm.
a much faster and larger scale.
Yeah.
You can take the foundational campaign, the piece of content, the ad, whatever it is, and pretty quickly get different versions based on different personas, different target audiences, and execute testing in a much, much faster way, which will allow you to get the data that you need to say, this works, this doesn't. And then you know what to do when you're fully ramped up or launching something at a larger scale. And that is so important and used to be very tedious and take quite a bit of time.
Yeah.
All right, let's do the bad next. So this is not ugly. Ugly's like gross, scary, but the bad is kind of the middle ground.
Well, my bads might be, or my uglies might be bad, but I'm just, we'll do your bads and then we can see where mine fit.
Okay. So first for me, which I don't know that I've figured this out yet, is how to account for platform bias.
Hmm.
The data models that the platforms that we use that are trained on are heavily dependent on the people at the company doing the training and the modeling, and there is innately bias. So anytime you are producing content, you have to know that there was a bias that went into what is being produced. And I don't know the answer on how to get around that. The second is IP getting stolen or getting shared out in the open space. And this is really tough and really important if you work at a B2B company and you have proprietary customer information, product information, financial information, and you want to use it as part of the content creation, but you have to know whatever you put in there potentially can and will be used to do model training and potentially could be accessed by your competitors. And then the third, which is probably the most common and the most obvious and the most talked about, is hallucinations. Things just flat out coming back with wrong, bad data, somebody not fact checking. There was an article, gosh, if I can find it, I'll drop it in the show notes. And it kind of went viral on social. It was a reputable, media outlet, and one of their contract writers wrote a whole piece with book recommendations, and the books were fake. So the person had gone in and used AI to generate this list, and somebody went in and went through it, and none of the books were real. And so they got blasted, right? And the author got just like, cremated online. But that's an example of if you have data that hallucinates and you're not being thoughtful and intentional and checking the data and then you use it, it can cause a lot of issues.
Yeah. All right. So my bad. So I'm going to build on your last one, or the one, not the hallucinations,
IP.
the IP, because the other sort of bit is a lot of these models were trained on popular culture. So films, music, news, even blogs and whatnot. And there's a lot of litigation, and Sarah Silverman's in a very famous sort of, she's bringing that litigation to bear because these artists didn't get compensated for what was an all-out intellectual vacuuming. And we've seen this before because Napster, which kind of came in and just it was essentially massive file sharing of music, changed how I mean, it forced Napster's reckoning, which Metallica, was it Lars Ulrich, the drummer, sued Napster into oblivion. And that's one of the reasons we have streaming now, or I pay for 6 streaming services, is because of the lawsuit. And so there is a lot of litigation around the crediting and the compensation that these models were trained on and when they make creations. So you got to keep that in mind. Then back to your first point in the bad is, or maybe it was in your good, the flip side of using it to create is, if you're using it to create and your competitors are using it to create,
Yeah.
ultimately you're all saying the same thing. And so your outline might give you and 400 other people the same outline. So those are my bads.
Yeah.
Now I have an ugly, but
I can't remember if I've mentioned this on a previous episode, but there's a whole movement now for folks that produce a lot of LinkedIn content to purposely have some typos, which makes it seem like your content was more authentically generated and or there was some human oversight versus just going, clicking the button and then cut and pasting it and putting on LinkedIn, which is so crazy to think that we've kind of come full circle now where people are purposely having typos and errors in their content.
Well, that gets to my ugly, because the amount of trash, and I'm censoring myself here, out on LinkedIn, and so much of it is AI content or AI infographics. Somebody made that point the other day. It's just making LinkedIn totally unusable. It's like, and I noticed somebody, and I've been considering doing this, is ending my emails with, "This was written by me. All errors are mine. No AI was used in the production of this." Just simply because it's just like where is the, it's just overwhelming amount of garbage.
I would say LinkedIn is my main platform as well, but I would say it's not just LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I mean, this is,
well,
you
I
use that as
talked
the
about
example.
YouTube.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But across all the platforms, it's like this, because now people can create content so quickly that there's not a lot of thought that has to go into it. So then it becomes, how do you make your content stand out against all this AI generated content, which is kind of a whole thing I think that people are still trying to figure out.
And by the way, I was remiss in, or we've been remiss in, we haven't even talked about the AI influencer. And and I don't know if you know the story. I can't remember exactly the details, but there is an AI, because you're thinking about the other social platforms. There are AI influencers that are AI generated, that do AI generated things, but they become advertisements for the for whatever brand.
I heard they were doing, gosh, I forget which AI company it was. They are doing auditions for people to be the face and voice of their AI influencers.
Oh,
So can
wow.
you imagine now, instead of it being you, they just want to use your face and voice and then recreate you using AIs.
This is a brave new world we are in. I as an old person, I'm struggling to wrap my head around it.
It freaks me out if I think about it too much. So I try to stay in my lane right now of AI is an incredible productivity tool. And because if I think about it too much, I go down a rabbit hole and then I think the world is ending.
That's fair. The only thing I would add on the productivity tools is I have seen workflows where you just give it one little prompt, and it goes through and generates everything all the way to a fully published product, like video, distributed out on multiple social channels. And it's hard to wrap my head around that it's so.
Well, since we've already gone, we're almost at 45 minutes, maybe we'll do content creation in procurement as a separate episode, because I want to make sure we have some time to talk about how I think procurement folks can be leveraging AI. And to your point, what should they also not be doing? There's a lot around supplier relationships that I think we need to be careful as it relates to AI.
Yes, and I think there'll be some. I already am lining up some uglies on that one.
Alrighty, that's the pod for the week. We will be back next Wednesday.